Seeing the attic door was a shock. I didn't want to open it for fear of what might be lurking behind. Instead, I ran upstairs and checked to see if the attic door was still there, the actual one. It was indeed. I then ran back downstairs into the basement, only to find that the door down there had vanished. Had I merely just imagined its presence? Thinking I had gone completely mad, I went back upstairs and sat down on the couch. My mind was running haywire trying to comprehend things, but it eventually gave in to its own weariness. I ended up taking a short nap, and that's when I had another weird dream. This dream was similar to the one I had before. I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a scratching noise. The only difference was it was coming from the basement rather than the attic. It too progressed and turned into a voracious knocking that I couldn't ignore. As such, I got up from the couch and went downstairs to put a stop to it. In my dream, the basement was empty. No mysterious door in sight. That and the knocking and scratching ceased upon my entrance. At my wit's end, I went back upstairs. The sound then returned, with a vengeance, only this time it was coming from the attic again. I ran up there as fast as I could, but the noise stopped. I waited. Following the narrative of my previous dream, the deadbolt clicked, signaling that the door had unlocked itself. Unlike my previous dream, however, the door opened up a bit and a hand reached out from within. That's when I woke up. Of course, I wrote the first dream off as a byproduct of an overstressed mind, but to have it reoccur, that wasn't ordinary. At least not for me. Between the door in my basement and the strange nightmares, I was a mess, both perplexed and frightened. I called my friend John. John is an eccentric fellow. He's the kind of guy who believes in UFOs, ghosts, conspiracy theories, the occult, and other things of that nature. Not only does he believe in them, but he studies them. He knows more about Roswell than I know about myself. Being a skeptic, I always thought the massive amount of information he retained was borderline useless. I changed my mind about that after seeing my attic door pop up in my basement. If anyone could help, or at least steer me in the right direction, it was him. I spoke with John for a couple of hours. He was ecstatic after hearing about my experience. He began rattling off all the different things he thought it might indicate. Some of his theories included a wormhole, a gateway into the other side, and even a glitch. One of his many theories that he subscribes to is that the world we live in is a simulation. He told me that he couldn't be completely certain about what it was without seeing it for himself, and unfortunately, he lives too far away to just stop by and visit. However, instead of him leaving me empty-handed, John gave me some advice on what to do next. After telling him about the voice I captured in the dreams I'd been having, he started leaning towards the whole ghost idea. He thought it might be trying to communicate with me. Because of this, he told me I should set up the voice recorder in the basement and ask the spirit some questions. I could play back the recordings after and listen for the voice. John said that I should do it in the attic as well. Though weary of his methods, I told him I'd try it out. After all, I couldn't just sit around and expect the situation to resolve itself. I didn't like the idea of going up into the attic by myself, but I needed to do something. After getting off the phone, I immediately put his plan into action. The basement would have to be first, as I was still apprehensive about going upstairs. I set up the app and put my phone on the basement floor. I proceeded to ask questions, leaving enough space in between for someone, or something, to answer. I asked for normal things, like its name, its age, what it wanted. After roughly 5 minutes of interrogation, I stopped the recording and played it back. I must have listened to my own voice a million times, hoping for anything audible to present itself. To my dismay, I caught nothing of the sort. It seemed as though the attic would indeed have to be my next venture. I reluctantly climbed the stairs up to the attic door. I looked at it for a few moments, took a deep breath, and unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door and braced myself. There was nothing there save for the previous owner's belongings. When I first purchased the house, I had to do a little bit of renovating, so to speak. The owner before me had no cable, electricity, or proper plumbing. On top of that, they left all their stuff behind. I had most of it removed, but left everything that was in the attic. I had no need for the space, and I didn't want to put any more money into emptying the house than I had to. I perused through the attic's wares for a bit, curious as to what it was that I technically owned. Some of the interesting items that stood out to me were an old postcard from Paris, a strange-looking dog collar, and a book on witchcraft. The fear set in while going through the contents of my new collection. The angled ceiling, antiques, and large window overlooking my yard did give the place a dose of charm. But I still didn't like attics. I quickly hit the record button on the app and set my phone on the floor. I asked the same questions as before, but didn't leave as much space in between as I really wanted to get the heck out of there. Before stopping the recording, I had a thought. Perhaps the spirit would respond if I asked it the same question that I did in my sleep. I cleared my throat and spoke. "Where are you?" After asking the final question, I stopped the recording and played it back. It sounded almost identical to the one I'd recorded in the basement, complete with a lack of answers. That is, until the very end. After I asked that last question, I heard a familiar, low whisper.
"Behind you."
After hearing the voice on my phone, I immediately turned around. There was nothing there. Despite this, I hightailed it downstairs. That eerie voice reinforced my phobia of attics and instilled in me an indescribable dread. I could no longer bear to be in that house by myself. I called John again and begged him to help me. I told him I'd give him gas money for the 8-hour round trip. He was reluctant at first, knowing that he'd have to spend the night and call out from work the next morning. But curiosity got the best of him in the end. After much deliberation, he agreed to come over. I waited for John in my car. While sitting there, I couldn't help but examine my house. I began asking myself questions like, is it really haunted? Do ghosts really exist? And my favorite, is this what my life has come to? Though the questions were speculative and rhetorical, I pretty much knew the answers. As I gazed towards the house in disappointment, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a silhouette standing at the attic window. What the heck? What the heck do I do? Those were the only retorts that crossed my mind after seeing the shadowy figure. After a few moments of staring, the figure stepped back from the window, completely out of sight. I sat and pondered about it for a few minutes after its departure. In a moment of bravery, I chose to go back in the house and up to the attic. Crazy, I know, but it's my house, and I needed to show this thing that I wasn't interested in playing its games, even if I was scared senseless. Besides, John would have my head if I didn't follow the damn thing. Feeling confident but still shaky, I ventured up into the attic. I swung the door open without hesitation and waltzed in like I owned the place. I mean, after all, I did. The attic was void of any ghostly figures, but it did harbor the faint scent of candle wax. Unsure of how to proceed, I started talking in a loud and firm tone. "This isn't your house.
I'm tired of your games, Spirit. I demand you leave at once.
I knew this wasn't going to work, but it was almost cathartic. I felt a heck of a lot better fighting back. I walked around the attic, satisfied with my rant, thinking that I had actually conquered my fear. My smug demeanor wouldn't last more than a few moments. Soon after I spoke, a gust of wind blew through the attic and hit me like a bus. Nearly knocked me over. I knew it was the ghost doing. I tried to stand my ground, but I was undeniably frightened. I watched as everything around me flew about, creating a tornado of mementos and keepsakes. I was about to retreat when I noticed something that hadn't budged an inch. It was the book on witchcraft that I had seen before. Upon noticing it, the wind inexplicably stopped, and everything fell to the floor. I walked over to the book, curious as to why it remained stationary. As I did, it opened on its own. It was startling, but I somehow sensed no malice. I was coming around to the fact that this ghost might really be trying to communicate with me. The page the book landed on was a spell. The whole thing was in Latin, but from what I could make out, it had something to do with growing plants. Confused, I reached out to the ghost for help. "What do you want me to do?" After asking the question, the attic door slammed shut. I thought for a moment and gathered that it wanted me to recite the spell in the attic. I was still confused, but somehow and weirdly calm. I felt as though I was helping the spirit in some way. Before I could read from the book, my phone went off. It was a text from John.
So sorry I can't make it out there. My boss won't give me the day off tomorrow, and I'm not sure my car will make it there and back. It desperately needs new tires, and I won't be able to buy those until Friday. Give me a call back then, and I'll see what I can do. Good luck.
Well, there goes that. Even though I wasn't freaking out anymore, it was nice knowing that someone was on their way to my house, just in case things went sour. I didn't like it, but I was on my own. I accepted it and turned my attention back to the book. It was time to deliver a spell. I cleared my throat and began reciting the text in the book. I took Latin in college, and although I didn't retain all the information, I knew enough to make the proper pronunciations. Even still, I stumbled over my words during certain parts. Because of this, I had to restart a couple of times. I wanted to get it right, especially if it was truly what the ghost wanted. After finishing the spell flawlessly, for the most part, the attic door opened. I walked out with the book in hand, wondering if everything was over. When I reached the bottom step and turned around the corner, it quickly became apparent that it wasn't. The basement door was wide open. I was in uncharted territory, taking orders from a ghost, but I hoped I was following along all right. Seeing the basement door ajar convinced me that I probably needed to recite the spell down there as well. I still wasn't sure why, but it felt like this was the spirit's will. As such, and strangely enough, I obliged. I walked down into the basement with the book and turned on the light. A quick glance around revealed that I was alone and there was no door. I cleared my throat once again and began reciting the spell, word for word. Honestly, I was a little excited. It felt like I was doing something productive about my ghost problem, and that it might actually help put it to rest. This time I got it right on the first try. Upon finishing the spell in the basement, the house began shaking. When I say house, I mean the whole house, basement and all. I'd never experienced an earthquake before, but it seemed like the only logical explanation for what was happening. It wasn't until I looked around the room during the madness that I realized it was the spell's doing. There on the far wall, shaking with the rest of the house, was the attic door, I wondered if the spell had somehow summoned it, simultaneously causing the house to wobble. The tremor eventually stopped, and I was left with the door, lending credence to my theory. I waited for a few minutes thinking the door would open, but it didn't. It seemed that I would have to do that myself. I wasn't too happy about it, but I'd come too far to back out now. I gathered my wits and walked over to the door. I proceeded to swing it open, without fear, just as I had upstairs. Behind the door was a surprise. It was the attic. The attic, the upstairs, everything was the same. Only there was a man standing at the window. Hearing me open the door, he turned around. His eyes widened when he saw me. He ran so fast in my direction that I didn't even have enough time to take more than a single step back. He rushed through the doorway and into the basement. He turned back around and slammed the attic door shut, making sure to lock the deadbolt. He turned to me, grabbed me by the shoulders, and looked me dead in the eye. I was baffled and scared for my life. "Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much." After expressing his thanks, the man let go of me and ran upstairs, but not before turning back around and offering me some advice. "Whatever you do, don't go in there." He gestured toward the attic door before bolting upstairs. I ran after him. I'd wanted to ask so many questions, but by the time I got up there, it was already too late. My front door was open and I could see him running down the dirt road towards town. And that was that. I've slept every night since with no noises or paranormal issues whatsoever. I even set up the cameras and voice recorder a few times to make sure. They didn't catch a damn thing. I don't know what the heck happened, but I am sure of one thing. The man that came out from behind that attic door was no ghost. He was a living, breathing person.